Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore with another of our virtual events here. And I'm really excited about today's event. We have two of my favorite relatively new authors. The first one, we're here with Abigail Dean to discuss her terrific novel, Girl A, and which is getting a lot of attention worldwide, deservedly so. And I'm really excited to get a couple questions in. And my friend Caz Frear, who's another of my favorite writers. This is her latest book, Shed No Tears. And we did a program, I think it was back in December, wasn't it, Caz? And just a remarkable writer. And Caz very kindly agreed to come in and talk with Abigail today. And so welcome, the two of you. It's great to have you both with us.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, and I'm largely going to be in the background, you'll be pleased to know, but I'll be monitoring the Facebook feed here at the Poison Pen. So if you have questions for Abigail or Caz, go ahead and send them in the comments field. And I'll pop up, I don't know, guys, maybe half an hour, 40 minutes in with any questions, or maybe some questions of my own. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Caz.
Okay, thank you. Well, thanks very, very much for having me. And yeah, I was doing a very, very similar thing as Patrick just said at the beginning of December. And we were talking about, what are you reading at the moment? And I'd literally, I think, just finished Girl A the day before. So it was kind of on the brain, and I've been thinking about it ever since. It's the kind of book that I've reread it for this interview, but it is the kind of book that I know I will go back and read again. And in rereading, there's so much that I kind of, it's not that I've forgotten it happened, but you understand an awful lot more once you get to the end. You really sort of start to understand how the whole thing was put together. So just phenomenal, and huge congratulations for all the success you're having, Abigail. But what I wanted to say first and foremost is just, how are you? Because this has been a crazy time for everyone. But was it about 18 months or so ago that Girl A sort of suddenly the buzz started building, and we all started hearing about this amazing novel? And then you've gone from the complete roller coaster of that to the start of a pandemic, and then launching a book in a pandemic. And yeah, how are you?
I think I'm okay. I think. Exactly. It is kind of, it's very strange, I think, because it feels like quite a sort of groundbreaking thing, to have your book published. It's definitely sort of like a childhood dream, and all the cliches apply. Like it really is a cliche kind of, but it is a dream come true. And then I think that the strange thing is, a lot of the sort of points that would make that real, like going into a bookshop and seeing your book and getting to meet readers and booksellers, kind of doesn't happen at present, especially in the UK, where, Caz, and I'm sure you're the same, we're both under pretty strict lockdowns still. So it's this kind of strange contrast of things feeling incredibly different, and at the same time things feeling oddly monotonous, because that's how they've been for a while. But yeah, there's still been some champagne, albeit with like my husband and cat, like rather than the wider kind of book community. And yeah, I think that the only thing that's been sort of really gutting is not getting to meet readers and not getting to meet booksellers and sort of say thank you, I guess.
Yeah, because this is actually the first time that we've spoken, and I think normally you would have, in that, well, certainly from the middle of last year, you have festivals and you have lots of events, and you kind of lose that a little bit. But I mean, this has been absolutely fabulous that you're getting in front of people. Have you done this sort of thing in the UK as well?
Yeah, I have a bit, and I think the fact that kind of podcasts, that live streams, that videos are now just so much more normal. In a way, it is a chance to meet more people, albeit in this kind of maybe less direct way. But it's the same with social media, actually, which in the past I've sort of been a bit like wary of. I've actually found, like, for the most part, I've had some like really awesome encounters with people, like with readers, and hearing what people have thought about the book, and with other writers as well. Because those are relationships that it would be awesome to be kind of have been making over the last 6 months, a year, that just haven't quite happened in the ordinary way, but hopefully there's been enough virtual stuff that I feel really kind of lucky for that.
It's just become the norm now, hasn't it? I think in the first few months it just felt quite bizarre, but now it's like having Zoom drinks with your friends and all those kind of things that at the beginning felt like this novelty. Now it's just something that we do, and I think that the book industry has really adapted so well to the pandemic and the situation we find ourselves in. So before I have 1,000,001 questions, and I'm sure I won't get around to all of them, and obviously it'd be really good to hear from readers as well and their questions, but before I sort of go and start sort of funneling into it, you're obviously the best person to talk to us about what Girl A is about. Give us that elevator pitch, or slightly longer elevator pitch, and also I'm just really interested to know, if there was, and there may or may not be, but was there a sort of a light bulb moment for the idea for Girl A, or did it percolate over a number of years and sort of grew and the layers were added in?
Sure. So Girl A is Lex Gracie, and as a child she manages to escape from her family home, which becomes known over time as the House of Horrors in the press. And as she does so, she frees her 6 brothers and sisters and exposes her parents' cult, and the crimes that have been taking place there against their children. And Girl A opens kind of 15 years after that. By that time, Lex is living in New York, well away from the House of Horrors in the UK. She's a successful attorney. She's kind of just doing everything that she can to avoid thinking about her childhood. And that's until her mother dies in prison. And when she does, she leaves Lex and her siblings the House of Horrors, where they grew up, forcing Lex to return to the UK with the dubious honour of having been appointed executor of her mother's will. There she's got to reconnect with her siblings and decide the fate of the family home and the fate of the House of Horrors. And I think it's really kind of that triggers a real kind of I guess journey back to her childhood, and back to her and her siblings' old battles and their old alliances that have formed in this shared childhood. So that is Girl A. In terms of whether there was a light bulb moment, so oddly enough, I think that actually was slightly, and it was sort of a combination of kind of slow burn things that I've been thinking about for a long time, kind of combining. I think that was the
light bulb, basically.
Yeah, it was like a sort of like relatively dim light bulb, because things had already been working for a while, but that there kind of was a light bulb. I think that the sort of things that came together really were my interest in siblings, and a sort of lifelong really fascination into that relationship, and writing about it as well, which mostly came from me being an only child, I think. When I sort of I look back at it and like sort of scrutinize it, I was always just interested in that dynamic where you could kind of loathe one another and also have this like fierce love for each other at the same time. And I think it was that kind of those ideas and sort of short stories that I'd written about that, and particularly about sisters, that kind of combined with my interest in true crime and in, you know, what comes after the headlines have kind of passed, what comes after the news stories have sort of dimmed in the like months and years that follow. So I do remember at some point, and I think it was like in that sort of like, I don't know when you have your kind of best ideas, Caz, but I often find it sort of just as I'm going to sleep, which is really unhelpful.
Yeah. Going to sleep or in the shower, there's something about water that kind of makes things clearer. I have my best and my worst ideas going to sleep. I sometimes have those, oh my God, this is the next book, and then wake up the next morning and think, no, that's a dreadful idea. That's been done so many times. That makes no sense. But yeah, falling asleep or water.
Yeah, I agree. And it was the falling asleep in this occurrence. And obviously, as soon as that happens, you're like, well, now I'm not sleeping for the next few hours. But I think it was okay to lose one night's sleep. It feels like a kind of fair trade.
So, I mean, you touched on one of the big questions that I had there about, you know, I'd sort of read that you're an only child, and so therefore you had this fascination with big groups of siblings, and certainly with the Gracies, big groups of siblings. But I just wondered, you know, is that something that you've always just been so interested in that it came quite naturally, or did you actually go away and have to sort of almost research? And I find it really, really interesting, because I'm writing at the moment I don't have children, and I'm writing from the perspective of a mother, a sort of harried mother of three, really, really different to anything I've written before. And a lot of people have sort of said to me, but how can you write from that perspective? You don't really, you know, you haven't experienced it. And you think, but I observe it all the time. I'm sort of at that age where all my friends have kind of young kids, and I see different styles of parenting. And sometimes I just think being an observer of it makes you perhaps even a better writer for it.
Yeah, I was gonna say exactly that around being an observer, and I was like, it's probably gonna sound creepy if any of my friends are listening. Yeah, exactly. But I think it was that a bit, you know, pretty much all of my very close friends and my partner as well have siblings, and I think that it was, especially as a child, you go around to people's houses and you sort of see those relationships, you know, those dynamics in action. And I think it kind of sets your imagination going, because it is a relationship that you're not a party to. So there's almost every opportunity, I think, you know, to imagine how it might be based on the observations as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it was the fact that sometimes, you know, the same sort of brother and sister, you know, you'd go around one day and they would seem like to have like the best bond, like just something that was really enviable almost in terms of just how close, you know, that they were. And then you'd go around like a week later and it would be like they wanted to murder each other. Like they were close. And so I think it was just that I'm not sure you have that in many other relationships in a way, that you can be sort of that close with that kind of tension as well. But that the kind of the sort of bond of the fact that you're very likely to always be in each other's life. And I think, yeah, that was one of the things that, you know, just observing, I think over time, it is how the Gracie family sort of came into being.
And it's so well observed as well. And I think what I found amazing is that obviously, you know, this group of siblings have this horrific and incredibly dysfunctional childhood. you know, something that I can't relate to in so many ways, but I could relate to the dynamics going on there, the sort of, you know, the little mini factions that spring up, and the rivalry, the eye rolling, the, as you say, you're great friends one day and you can't stand each other, and the sort of the burning resentments. You get that in every single family. And even though this is, you know, a very they were living in a very extreme environment, I could just recognize that with my own family. And I think, and we'll probably touch on this quite a bit, I think there's just so much, you're so good at characterization, there's just so much that you can relate to in the characters, even though the actual situation of the book, you know, the vast majority of us can't even imagine what that would be like. And I think on the characterization, I wanted to ask, and we'll go on to Lex in a minute, but did you, when you started out with the siblings, did you have a sort of set idea of their characters, or is that something that came to you? Because I found, you know, it was amazing from almost, certainly the first chapter, but it might have been the first couple of pages. Lex is, I think she's in the prison, and she's kind of talking about how she's not been there before, and she's imagining her siblings there, and she says something like, oh, I could imagine Delilah reclining and Ethan coming just for the nobility of it. And it's like straight away, it's like, right, I know Ethan now, and I know Delilah, I know what they're like from those two observations. So did you sort of have very, very strong ideas about those characters and their quirks and their personalities, or was it a case of sort of a lot of going back and adding in flavour?
It was quite a lot of going back, to be honest. I think especially when I started writing. So it's really interesting that you mentioned those references as well, because I actually remember adding them later, like very vividly.
I just knew those characters 2 pages in. Like, I know exactly what they're like.
So I know for a fact that they came later. So I sort of feel like, oh, I can actually remember that part of the process, which is quite rare. Like often I'm like, where did that sentence come from? Like, who wrote that?
Which character is that?
Yeah, like who? So yeah, I think that it was a case that I had sort of very much sketches of the characters starting out, and I sort of knew roughly kind of who they would be. And it is quite strange because some of the siblings, so yeah, Lex's older brother Ethan, her younger sister Evie, I think that they kind of were very clear characters right from the off, and I think kind of characters that I'd been thinking about in a way for a while, like potentially in different situations and in different forms, but they sort of felt like very defined. Whereas I think that Delilah as a character, so Lex's sort of younger, very caustic sister, I feel like she really developed like right into editing with Viking and Harper Fiction. So it was a bit of a combination in a way, and I think it's that sort of interesting thing, and one of the hardest things about knowing when editing is over is that you almost feel like you can keep chipping away at characters for such a long period of time, and sort of like kind of like shaping them as if you were shaping like a sculpture or something, like just to get the like lines so precise and make them just, I just wanted them to be kind of real people really, and people, you know, I don't think of any of the Gracie family really as sort of necessarily strongly drawn as being completely good or completely evil, but just being kind of very, very vivid and real is what I'd always sort of hope.
Yeah, and that is, you know, that is definitely the case for all the characters. But to talk about Lex for a minute, because I think, you know, certainly for me, books are generally all about voice, and I think it doesn't matter how compelling or fast-paced or how shocking or whatever the plot, if I don't have to like the character, but if I don't believe that the character is a real person, it's just not as satisfying a read for me. And Lex just sort of appears fully formed on the page and is such a clear, confident voice. And I suppose, I mean, I was just thinking, it's a similar sort of question, but did you always know that Lex would be telling the story? Because the structure of the book, for those who haven't read it, is we kind of meet each sibling in a new chapter, but it's all told through Lex's eyes and her sort of perceptions of them and their life and what they've been through. And, you know, in some ways, I suppose you could have had each character telling their own story. Was it sort of a very conscious decision that the whole world would be viewed through Lex's viewpoint?
It was once I started writing, but as I was plotting, I actually thought I would narrate each chapter from a different sibling, potentially. That was, I think, in my first sort of like, in the first epiphany moment, that was sort of what I was thinking of. And then I think it was the case that almost as soon as I started writing, that just went completely out of the window. And it was very much a case that I think I just fell in love with her a bit. And I think that also just in sort of plotting, I think one thing that I really always love in books, and I wanted to be the case in Girl A, was that I think that there are mysteries between the siblings. There's mysteries in the family, and there's kind of mysteries in the house where they grow up as well. You know, there's things that maybe are never quite clear to Lex. And I think maybe having every sibling narrate their chapter, I was a bit worried that I might lose some of that you would almost get everybody's full story in a way that within a family you never quite get. Like, there are always kind of conflicting, I guess conflicting memories, and I didn't necessarily want them fighting for fighting for clarity. It was more a case of like, some of the mysteries are there for Lex, and then they're there for readers and for me as well, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. And I think one of the big things that I really enjoyed about all the characters, really, but I suppose Lex is our heroine, and she really is. She's got, again, from page one, she's got this kind of real stoicism about her that I loved. And there's also, you know, the book has been described so many times as and in a complimentary way, I should say, but as, you know, pitch black and incredibly dark subject matter, which is right, obviously. But I really like the dry humour throughout. I really liked, and some of that came out in the conversations between the siblings. I loved that. I think is it Gabriel that calls Delilah the roach? That just made me laugh out loud. And it's not to sort of overplay the humour here. This is clearly a dark tale, but I think it's not humour for the gag's sake. It's just humanity. People generally aren't relentlessly depressing. People do try and get a little bit of humour out of bleak situations, and I think that again made them all feel incredibly real, that they weren't you know, as the book goes on, we can certainly see that Lex has been hugely affected by what happened to her, but she does have this sort of everyday front to the world, it feels, where she's, you know, she's very stoic, she's funny, she's witty. And I love that we see that she's gone to uni and she's got these very close friends and she's got a great relationship with her adoptive parents. She's had this awful upbringing and these terrible things that have happened to her, but she's just, as you started off saying, she's really tried to make the best of it in every way. She's got the great job, she's, as I say, great friends, she's had relationships, and yeah, I really enjoyed spending time in her head. And I just wondered how much of you comes out in Lex's voice, because I think when you're writing in the first person, there's maybe always a little bit of maybe your own voice that bleeds through, or not. I know, so because I write in the first person and I know it does. I don't know, did you feel sort of, even though you said you completely fell in love with her, do you feel slightly removed from the character, or are there elements of yourself in there?
It's a really great question. I'm also just so happy that like you liked the and enjoyed the humor as well, Caz, because I wanted that to come out like so much in terms of just, I think Lex is funny. I'm not funny as well. I should say my partner was like, oh God, like if Lex is funny, like it can't be you. So I think that there are sort of probably elements of my voice in kind of Lex's narrative. Some friends have said, they've been really surprised because they expected to sort of hear various phrases, or I think to hear an echo of sort of my voice in her, and they've said, oh yeah, they couldn't tell it was you at all. Which I like a lot, but then I think at the same time maybe there are more elements of your own your kind of inner voice, and it's going to sound I don't sound too sort of pretentious here, but I think maybe there are elements of how you speak to yourself and of how you maybe see the world more quietly that you don't necessarily vocalize, and I'd say maybe that is my kind of internal monologue is much more what comes out in Lex's voice. I think does that, I don't know, is that familiar to you, Caz? Is that kind of just ridiculous?
Yeah. And was there ever any thought, and I suppose we'll go on to kind of writing process, particularly with what you're writing next, but was there any thought about whether you would write in the first person and whether the story needed to be told in the first person, or whether you would have Lex as a slightly more removed character? Is it just the way it came? Because that is how it is for me. I almost the book I'm writing at the moment is first person, but there are a couple of characters where I'm writing in the third person, and I struggle with those chapters because I feel like I've almost exited the character. It's like I can feel my soul coming out of them, and I'm just this sort of observer moving them about to move the plot forward, if that makes sense. I just write in the first person. That's just the way I write. But was that a conscious decision?
Not particularly. I think it was just sort of, I think, thinking about the story, and I wanted it to be, I think there are moments in Girl A when it is just this kind of you're almost unbearably close to Lex, I think, at times, especially when she's sort of sharing details of her childhood. And I think because she's quite a reserved character, writing the first person, it almost feels like the only way you would get close enough to get to know her almost. So it wasn't conscious. I think it was just her voice was sort of very much there. I think, it sort of came with, as soon as the decision was made, in terms of, okay, I'm going to sort of pursue this story. I think as soon as I started writing, it was just so clearly her voice. She was the kind of guide to this family. And that I never really considered writing Girl A in the third person at all. It was either going to be each of the siblings having a voice, which would just have been like a cacophony of sort of characters. It would have been terrible. Exactly. And very quickly it was just Lex.
I think that another thing that really impressed me and was quite an unusual structure is how seamlessly you move between the present and the past. Now obviously that happens in lots of different books, but it tends to be quite a present past kind of alternating chapters, whereas you will introduce each character and it's sort of it just kind of, you can be very much in the present tense with Lex visiting Gabriel and sort of talking about his troubles, and then suddenly we're back at Hollowfield and something has happened way back in the past. How easy was that to do? Did you write the past all in one chunk, or is that just how the story came naturally to you?
Yeah, it's how the story came naturally. So I think it was, I kind of always wanted there to be this kind of flicking between the present and the past. And I just really enjoyed that contrast. I think some of it was actually the fact that there's almost a reassurance in the present that the various characters, you know, that they've been affected hugely, each of the Gracie siblings, but that they're kind of there, and that you know that they've survived, and they're doing kind of, well, I was going to say okay, but you know, they've coped and failed to cope in different ways. And I almost found that was offered sort of a comfort, even in the writing, I think, to return sometimes to the present. And I think particularly in writing the second chapter, you know, I'm writing about Ethan, I think I realized more and more that it also put in this, in sort of for me, a really uncomfortable comparison, you know, the way somebody is as a child and the way they are as an adult. And it made me sort of think about my own sympathies for the characters I was writing, you know, in a way that you can have a child who you might be immensely sympathetic for, and then what do they become, and does that sympathy kind of linger, or does it fall away? So I think that was another thing that sort of surprised me as I was writing, and then it kind of stuck with me for the rest of the novel, was this kind of, was the question that poses, you know, alternating between the past and present, and particularly a question of sympathy.
Okay. And you know, the backstory or the past, how did you go about, because it's obviously a really shocking story, but it never feels gratuitous. I think, you know, we're under no illusions that there is something deeply, deeply wrong in that house, and you give enough detail to really sort of plant the reader there. But it sometimes feels that you, in a good way, almost just stop before you get to the real sort of headline details that maybe another writer would sort of really want to plough the depths of. Was that something, did you want to focus more? I mean, for me, I actually found, when reading the past, it was kind of the more human stories that really stayed with me, rather than you know, the bindings, the chains, which are awful. But there was a bit about when Lex got her first period, and going through those sort of passage of rites and living in that sort of environment almost felt more shocking to me, and her experiences at school and trying to make friends but never really being able to hang on to them because she can't invite anyone to the house. And there was a lot of humanity, a lot of the human element, I suppose, of the backstory, rather than hitting people over the head with, and then this terrible thing happened. Again, was that sort of a conscious thing?
I think it's maybe just something that affects me more as well. Sort of like whenever I've read you know, novels which have kind of real darkness or bleakness in them, I always find it's sort of the tenderness that gets you. It's those sort of like smaller moments and those specific moments, rather than like the sort of like real violence or sort of gore in any way. So I think a bit of it was what was intentional in terms of, I guess I find the more powerful things, the things that you mention. So, you know, the sort of details of dirt, and like, how would I feel if I had to go to school and I wasn't able to have washed at home? And I think that they're often the things that's easier to sort of put yourself in somebody's shoes, in having that kind of touch of the like mundane those scenes in a way. And, you know, I think Lex kind of washing with that pink hand soap that every school seems to have, that was such a sort of like, I don't know, stuff like that makes me kind of, it's in a way, it's more visceral than violence, I guess, in a way, or at least that's kind of how I found it sort of writing. And then I think another side was very much just that I didn't want it to be kind of something that felt exploitative or that felt violent in a sort of kind of gratuitous way at all. I guess, I feel like that there's you know, the house kind of does have its mysteries, and I think some of that is also a case that, yeah, it almost goes without saying how tough things were for the Gracie children. I don't think it kind of needs to be said or to be spelt out in sort of painstaking detail, in a way that I think would just kind of feel long on the page, and could feel kind of exploitative.
And I think, you know, you do almost from the first page sort of set out your stall that this is a story about survival and resilience and human spirit, rather than misery, even though, you know, what happened to them in their childhood has followed them into adulthood. We know that, you know, that they have survived to different levels. And I think is, you know, again, is that sort of what you want people to take away from the book, that sort of hope and resilience and stoicism?
Yeah, I think that is definitely the case, and I think that's, you know, kind of going back to Lex as narrator, I think that sort of, she like drives that, because she is just such a sort of admittedly very dry and at times pessimistic, but she's a really hopeful character as well. You know, but beneath her sort of external pessimism and skepticism, I think there's a real genuine like resilience and kind of she is just a hopeful character. And I think, you know, in the relationships with each of the siblings, there is a real kind of hope and humor as well. And I think you're right. If there had been kind of more scenes of kind of extreme violence and something that felt more graphic, yeah, I guess it can erode that side of the, so that in terms of that's not the thing I'd want people to remember at all.
I found it quite interesting and really in keeping, I guess, with Lex's character as I kept reading on, that quite early on in the book, she's talking about, albeit sort of the earlier days of the Hollifield, but she actually says it wasn't actually that bad. But, you know, the initial bit wasn't that bad. We had each other for company, and even from the start, you sort of see somebody that it's not trying to whitewash at all, but it's trying to tell the true story of how things got worse. But, you know, there were some lighter moments, and, you know, they enjoyed being together. It's not just, you know, as I keep saying, it just comes back to, it's not this relentlessly being beaten over the head with misery. There are, you know, those human lighter moments too.
Yeah, definitely. There are good days, and I think one of the sort of scenes that is more personal in the book is the visit when the Gracie children go to Blackpool, the seaside town for people who kind of aren't familiar with it. And I remember as a kid kind of going with my grandparents to Blackpool, and it being this kind of total, like, I was in awe of the place. Like, it felt so kind of, it just felt like the best place kind of in the world. It has a great theme park and sort of seafront, and yeah, I think that there are these kind of moments of real kind of sort of romance in Lex's childhood. You know, there's a sort of like I kind of idyllic scenes, particularly at the beginning, and I think that also kind of helped with the story feeling much more real, because, you know, you always get that sort of really banal question of oh, well, you know, why didn't someone just leave, or, you know, why didn't they just escape? But yeah, I think things never happen in that way, in all sorts of situations, and I wanted that to really be the case. You know, it's not that it's only very, very late on, really, when it becomes clear that you need to escape, and by that point, obviously, it's for Lex, it's much, much more difficult.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting I think it is towards the end when is it Bill says to Lex something along the lines of, have you ever thought about what your mother endured from your father, almost as if to say, you know, that there should be some forgiveness there. And I think Lex is quite sort of pushes him away and just says, you know, I've got too much else to think about. I don't have room to be thinking about what she went through. And that was, yeah, I thought that was quite interesting, because I wondered how she would, because the mother she's such a key character, but she is, because of who she's very meek, and she just is kept right in the background. But I loved the part about how the mother and father met, and they're just all such rounded characters that, you know, as we said, whether you love or loathe them, you're certainly not indifferent to any of them, that they're all so vividly drawn. And it's such a character-led book, the best kind, in my opinion. But
thanks, Caz.
And what I suppose, you know, and this might, in some ways, I was going to say explain the success. No, the brilliant writing explains the success. But the point I was going on to make was, it's quite hard to know what to compare it to, what to compare Girl A to. And, you know, you've probably seen for yourself now in publishing, there is kind of this kind of need to, if you like this, you'll like this, and it's a bit like this, and it's this genre, and to really kind of pigeonhole. And it's really difficult to think exactly where or what I would compare Girl A to. So I guess I was just thinking, you know, were there any direct influences? And if not, just what have you grown up reading, and what sort of might you have been subconsciously influenced by?
Yeah, I absolutely love reading, and I think there are definitely some, yeah, but there's some books, but there's also some TV shows as well that I would give equal kind of credit to. So I think that I love Gillian Flynn, and I love Sharp Objects, and the way that the family in that book is
my favorite, easily my favorite of hers.
Yeah, I mean, just and the house in that book as well. It's another book with just like, you know, sort of really, the house is kind of a character, you know, that old Southern house in its own right. So I would definitely say Gillian Flynn. I would definitely say Cormac McCarthy. I find that his kind of mix of real bleakness with kind of amazing human relationships and how they're drawn, particularly in The Road, has been like I don't know, I feel like I read The Road when I was at school, and it's been sort of like a lifelong inspiration for writing. And then I think TV-wise, I was watching the first season of Succession when I was kind of finishing Girl A, and just like that acidic dialogue and the sort of totally screwed up family relationships was just, you know, like kind of like gold dust. And same with Sopranos as well, in terms of this huge family with, you know, so many sort of secrets and old grudges, and yeah, so that was another that was another
interesting. Succession, when you were talking earlier on about having sympathy for characters, because I know I'm a huge fan of Succession, and when I've recommended it to people, some people will watch a couple and just, I can't get into it. I know the dialogue's great, but the characters are just so awful, and you think, but stay with it and you'll find they're not. But even if you think they are, you will fully understand why they've turned out that way, and then you just start to have a lot more empathy for them.
Yeah, you almost have, it's almost like a painful sympathy. I think at times I kind of wonder, well, why do I feel so sympathetic for them? And it just shows how fantastically the writers have drawn those characters. And also I think, you know, in the space of a few episodes, you can go from having no sympathy for someone to, you know, almost being like really moved by their situation. Which I think is just incredible writing. Like, yeah, just so good.
Patrick popped in and popped
out. I lost my video there for a second. Abigail, can you talk a little bit about your background as a lawyer, and you know, what kind of law you practice? And I was really heartened to see that you were also a former bookseller.
Yeah, that's right. I worked at the Waterstones in Manchester, my sort of hometown, for a good stretch of time, and really kind of loved it. It was just very. I think the sort of pleasure of recommending books and having customers come back in and chat about them is just, yeah, just an amazing feeling. I also worked at the kind of slightly more commercial store in town, so we got like David Hasselhoff in for signing, and there was a lot of like amazing moments in that job. So yeah, now I work as a lawyer for Google. So kind of specializing in technology contracts and sort of negotiating and drafting those. It's one of those things where a lot of people have said, well, you know, that's so different from writing, you know, legal terminology. It's so sort of inexplicable. It's so odd. I find that the two, for me at least at present, go really well together. And I think it's because I feel like with law and with every contract that you draft, there is such words have huge weight, and you can read a court judgment that will spend 4 pages talking about a particular word or talking about a particular comma. So for me, it kind of makes me, I think it makes me question words more, and consider each word kind of at a sentence level, which is probably really painful at times, especially for my clients. But I think that is not that far from writing, thinking about how different words affect how readers think about a character, or how a particular sort of sentence could you know give 2 different implications to different people. So at present, I find they complement each other pretty well.
Can you talk also, and then I do have a couple of questions from viewers, but can you talk about the importance of the house itself and you know, the House of Horrors in the book? And do you find that I don't know, I don't want to come across as too esoteric, but you know, physical places where traumatic events have occurred, you know, homes where violence has occurred. It seems like it's a very interesting topic. What is the importance of the house itself in the book?
I very much think of the house as a character. I think that it's often the case in in films, and I mean, I guess Caz and I already mentioned the house in Sharp Objects, and the sort of the history that has. I think everything from, you know, the hotel in The Shining to Hogwarts, right? Like those places just completely become a character in their own right. And that's my kind of intention with the house on Moorwoods Road in Girl A, is that it kind of changes over time. It has its own sort of presence, and it has its own sort of secrets in different rooms. So I very much had a sort of diagram of the house and of which rooms the various Gracie siblings stay in and are kept in. I just wanted it to have that kind of specific power that I think houses have to me, and you know, locations have. I think I certainly feel quite strongly that I might not necessarily believe in ghosts in a very sort of literal way, but I do believe that places can have particular atmospheres, and that, you know, if you have the knowledge that certain things have happened in a place, that very much affects the sense of the place to me or to somebody else. And you know, I think you see it with some sort of famous crime cases as well, where houses are sometimes sort of destroyed because, you know, it's a sort of act of erasing what happened there. Yeah, I think buildings do have a real power and a real sort of a real atmosphere that is as sort of close to ghosts as I think I come in a way.
And you mentioned, I was intrigued to hear you talk about your love of true crime, and I too have that same fascination with true crime. And one of the things that I find very interesting and kind of reminded me of Girl A was, when you're watching a true crime documentary and they're going back to a case that occurred, maybe decades before, and they interview, the surviving family members. And it's so fascinating to see how that, how the passage of time has affected them, and with some, some family members, oh, there we go. I'm sorry. I lost it there for a second. Some family members, you can see just the weight of grief and how it's just affected them over the years. And that I was fascinated with what you were saying earlier about that, how a period of time after, a sensational case like this, the effect it has on people, and it's never seems to be predictable,
Yeah, I agree. It seems like it can affect people in such different ways. And one of the, I guess in a way, having a bigger family and having the Gracie family in Girl A allows for all those different reactions. And it made me sort of think, well, how would I react? Because although I think I said, each of the children has coped and failed to cope. In different ways. Some have probably coped better, from objectively. And I think I always want to think, I would have Lex's sort of strength and her kind of grace in a way in the face of what's happened. But I have no idea. And I think that in a way I would be as likely to react as any of the Gracie children. But I think the exact thing, kind of, Patrick, you said is it's that looking beyond, beyond the sort of photographs and the headlines in those kind of years later, because I think that's when you sort of see the imprints and see the real effect of what often, if for many people, is sort of just glimpsed in a headline.
Sure. Now, a question, let's see, I have a question from one of our viewers. Arlene, she asks, what was your favorite part in writing Girl A? What was the most challenging? And did you consider other titles than Girl A? And why was it Girl A?
That's a really good questions. So I guess I'm going to work backwards and then start with the title question. So there were other titles considered, and I actually didn't submit Girl A to agents. I submitted. It was called then the Lifehouse, which is the name of the father in the book kind of calls his church, and my agent said to me, I think that sounds a bit more like a self-help book than you want for a sort of a thriller. So no, it did not become Girl A for a while. I think that's often the case. It sounds like novels often kind of go through shifts in titles, and that was definitely the case. And in terms of my favorite thing about writing Girl A was the relationships between the Gracie children and developing them. So kind of as Caz and I discussed around these sort of the ordinary grudges and the kind of ordinary sort of spite, that is there even in these extraordinary circumstances, and I think writing some of the dialogue between Lex and Ethan and between Lex and Delilah are probably some of my favorite scenes to write. I think that my least favorite part of writing, it's quite a difficult one. I'm almost tempted to be like, Caz, so what's your least favorite part of writing? I think for me it was you know, there are all, I think that in terms of, I'd often written short stories before, and I'd often written kind of character sketches before. And when you do that, you can just focus on like the most exciting parts. You know, you can focus on the really snappy dialogue. And I think what I found toughest in writing a novel was that there were also some scenes that have to be functional in some ways, and that have to connect parts of the novel and sort of add sense to it. And I think the challenge for me was making those scenes, I hope, as interesting and as sort of clear as the scenes which are just kind of a total joy to write. I don't know, Caz, what you feel about.
Just to comment on what you've just said, I couldn't even begin to imagine which were the sort of filler scenes in your mind. None of them really read in that way. They all seem, and particularly going back and rereading, you can just see why every single bit is so important and is at the right place. So but yeah, I do know what you mean, and I'm probably, that's probably a cop-out now by saying I'll just agree with what you said, but there is particularly because I write procedural fiction, for it to, or I have been writing procedural fiction, I think that there has to be certain things that will happen in a murder investigation from the police's point of view. And while I would never sort of want to write a book that was so authentic that the police just sat around for weeks on end waiting for something to happen or chasing dead leads, there has to be a bit of that in order to build tension. And I think, yeah, sometimes that can be trying to make that exciting, I suppose, when in your head it's, this is just here because I have to get here and you're going to love this bit, but we have to do this to get there. I don't know if readers, and hopefully readers don't really notice that, but when you know you're doing it, it can sometimes feel a little bit more of a slog. And some people will say that if it's feeling like a slog, or if it's feeling like it's not absolutely crucial to the heart of the plot, then it needs cutting. And I think I'd agree with that 80% of the time, but sometimes there just needs to be that sort of groundwork there.
Well, let's see. Well, I have a question here that says, it's a kind of a writerly question about opening chapters and the importance of opening chapters, and how much, well, the actual question is, do either of you change your first chapters once you've written your first draft? Is that something you go back and obsessively rework? I guess that's for either one of you or both.
Oh, go on, you go, Abigail.
I probably didn't rework it that much more than any of the other chapters, I'd say. Maybe only by virtue of the fact that it comes first, so it more has changed by the time you get to the end than the sort of final scene. So perhaps for that reason, I'd say it kind of required a bit more editing because characters had shifted slightly, or because, you know, that setting wasn't quite right anymore. But that was more because it had the misfortune of coming first rather than because it was the first chapter, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Yeah. And again, yeah, I would probably say similar. I think there is, in these short attention span times, I think there is the need to grab the reader straight away. And whether or not that's, you know, sort of a shocking first line or just putting them straight into the action, I think you need to make sure that you're not world building too much in that first chapter. So they never change fundamentally, but I think once you've done your first draft, you begin to see where you need to trim the fat a little bit more in those first few chapters.
Right. To kind of round this out a little bit, Abigail, the inevitable question, I'm sure you've probably sold the film or television rights to this story. Have you? Is there anything in the works?
It has been optioned. Yeah, it's been optioned by Sony with the idea that it will be a limited series, which is one of my favorite TV structures in terms of Sharp Objects and Patrick Melrose and Generation Kill, all sorts of my favorite TV shows. So I'm very excited about that.
Congratulations. And what are you working on now?
So for the last kind of coming up to a year, I guess, I've been working on another novel, which is about conspiracy theories. And it follows two characters in the aftermath of an attack, one of who loses a loved one in that attack, and the other who believes that the whole thing is a hoax and sets out to disprove it. And it follows those two characters in the sort of immediate aftermath, and then in the sort of longer time period after that takes place, as they get closer to conflict.
Wow. Where are you with that at the moment? Is the dirty draft down, or?
It's nearly down. I say that sort of really reluctantly because I kind of feel very much that I'm kind of close to jinxing it, and then I'm going to totally lose all track and sort of have some kind of crisis. It's probably about 3/4 of the way there to a first draft. But it's a really first draft. It's like draft 0.7 or something. I'm not sure it deserves 1 as a whole.
How about you, Caz? Can you kind of talk about your standalone that you've been working on?
Yeah, still working on it. Yeah, I mean, it's 80% down in a dirty draft, but then the hard work starts then. But I've written 3 police procedurals, part of a series, and this is a complete departure from that. I think not a departure in tone, definitely, but yeah, it's focused on a very, very different character who finds that her life is dismantling and someone very close to her is responsible for that. But she has a very strong self-perception that she is a good person that's never really done anything to anyone, to harm anyone in her life. So she has to start sort of mining her experiences to see what on earth she could have done to possibly have upset someone very, very close to her. And yeah, that's I really need to work on a much better pitch for that, but that's kind of what it's about. I think when we were talking, I'd said to you, Patrick, it's sort of the opposite of It's a Wonderful Life, in the sense that that's very much about, you never know how your life touches people in a good way. This is right. More, you never know how the decisions you make and the things you do in life, even if they're unintentional, you never know how that can completely mess up someone else's life. Right.
All the damage you've done or something. Yeah.
Unintentionally, maybe, but unintentional doesn't matter to the person on the receiving end a lot of the time.
Can't wait. Well, both of you, thank you so much. It's been a fascinating discussion, and congratulations, Abigail, on Girl A. Really wonderful to see all the attention you're getting for the book, and can't wait to see what you come up with next.
Thank you so much.
Right. And thanks so much, Caz. We really appreciate you stepping in and helping out with us today.
Oh, no, it was an honor. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, both of you will have what time is it there in the UK? Is it 10 o'clock or?
9:05.
9:05, okay, not too bad. Well, I hope you have a wonderful evening, and thanks everybody for watching on Facebook.
Thank you.
All right.